Here's the bird we're going to draw, although you're probably actually looking at the male Australian king parrot with the really bright red head on the lower left instead of the female in the upper right, which is actually the bird we're going to draw. I love our Australian birds, and my very overgrown front yard attracted these birds because of what was growing there for them to eat. There's also a female bowerbird with the male, and there you see it there. I love birds, but they're not easy to draw, and I don't often draw them. So let's start. This is the photo taken from that video that we're going to use. I'm using a 0.1 millimeter pen, and I'm using one that is fairly dried out because I wanted to have a certain element of being able to rough this bird out almost as if I was drawing with a pencil with graphite. Because I think birds are very difficult to draw because the form, the three-dimensional form that they have is often very subtle, doesn't always cast shadows in an obvious way. And if we're not careful, we really only end up seeing outline, and then we try and copy the outline, which can create a bit of a two-dimensional cartoon-like look, particularly if it's a nice smooth outline. However, the shape of the birds and their forming, their moulding, their wings, and the effect of the feathers over their bodies means that the forms are quite subtly irregular and I think very hard to draw with a clear, smooth line first go. Because drawing freehand in pen, there is no erasing. So I've deliberately chosen a pen that is not going to put a lot of ink on the paper at once. Now, it doesn't give me a lot of room for corrections, but it does give me some room, which is ideal for a subject such as this. Can I tell you, in all honesty, that I roughed out part of this bird 5 times before I actually felt confident enough to start. And that allowed me to see some mistakes I was making, or some observation I needed to do more carefully in terms of relative sizes of things such as the central wing, or the tail feathers, or the length of the neck. And so in my mind, I'm breaking this bird down into its parts. So I drew that closest wing first, and even that wing I divided it into 2 parts. And then I worked on the wing on the other side, and I paid particular attention to the shoulders. If you look at my reference photo, you see I've actually marked with black lines where the shoulders are, where the wings join the bird, because in a sense that's where the body stops and the neck starts. So it's a very convenient place to pause our thinking, our visualization. Now with a bird, the actual head part with the eye and the beak, I think, is always a challenge because there's not much room to make mistakes and have them not be noticeable. At this stage, can I say, I really wasn't sure how finished I was going to make this drawing. I had planned for it to perhaps be a shorter video, but I realized about this stage that in fact, no, to create a drawing that I think I'm going to be happy with, I need to put more time in it because it's just not going to be finished enough. And because of my, if you like, massaging certain lines and pushing edges in or outwards a little bit, parts of the bird look, I think, unhelpfully blobby. And by unhelpfully, I mean in ways that don't necessarily reflect the lighting or the form of the bird. And so I want to try and put more marks on the paper that will lessen the effect of ink that I'm not really happy with where it is, and emphasize the ink which I'm more confident is in a better position. And so I'm really just now observing the body. Now, can I say this drawing took me just over 30 minutes to draw in real time. You're watching this part in just over double time, and then The last 10 minutes of the real-time drawing, I've made that double time and a half, because that's where I'm doing all of the foliage around the bird behind. And it's also where I tweak the values to, in a sense, define the bird I really want, to really visually attract the eye to certain places and to hide certain things that I didn't think were helpful. So this is actually a great video for bringing out the best of the marks we've put by the end, and of continuously re-evaluating exactly what we're trying to do after what we've actually done changes. At this point, I'm trying to just get a sense of these tail feathers. Now you'll see that I've made them longer, and that looks pretty terrible here. However, now I start to do some hatching, and I decide that this deep turquoisey blue color of the tail feathers is a dark enough value that I can put hatching on it, not to represent shade or shadow, but to represent the darker color. And that lets me, I think, reasonably efficiently hide the extension point that I've put on. I think it's always helpful when we're doing a drawing to correct any lines, marks that aren't in a helpful spot if we possibly can, even if that leaves marks in the wrong spot. If we've put them in the wrong spot, then it's going to impact the drawing. So let's learn everything we can from this drawing now that's perhaps not going to be as accurately done as we'd hoped, but to learn lessons from that. So the best way to learn the lesson is to put the line in the right spot, because now that we have a wrong line to guide us, it's actually easier to locate the right spot. Or maybe when we observe more carefully a second or third time, we actually see other errors that mean that it's probably not worth the bother. But we've learnt how to do that. We've learnt the sort of errors we make. And that means next time we're further ahead. Next time we have that as experience, something we've learned. At this point now, I'm trying to define some of the shadowed areas of the bird. And you can see me now doing hatching to get a sense of the roundness of the body. And yet, although it's approximately round here, it's not a smooth roundness. There are planes formed by the feathers and the way they're put together, the way they sit on the wing limbs. And at this point, I don't really have a strong sense of how dark I'm going to make these values. The thing about values is we understand them in relation to other values. So whether something looks light or dark depends on what's around it. So at the moment, those tail feathers look the darkest, and they look quite dark. But at the end of the drawing, they won't seem nearly as dark because I've made other sections darker. I'm drawing now the context of the bird. So it's sitting on something, so I need to have the something. But it's also sitting on a mass of old, dried out cosmos flowers, which had been in the front lawn. And there's a lot of weed coming up underneath, which is what the male was actually eating. He was eating the weed. This female king parrot, though, was eating some small cherry tomatoes that had self-sown in the front garden. Now, with the background, I'm trying to capture the effect of the background, not the detail of it. And I do that in a scene such as this by drawing a little bit in detail, because I find that's more realistic looking than trying to draw it all from my imagination. But I don't feel obliged to draw it all. And at some point, particularly after I've got to feel what sort of marks will capture the sort of subject matter we have, I start to fill in gaps from my imagination and position things that I think will work well with my scene. So I'm working on the bird still, and you'll know I go back and forth from area to area, adding more hatching as I adjust the values. And at this stage, I was thinking maybe I'd leave it looking like this, but I finished up being a bit unhappy with the really heavy line on the top of the bird's head, because it really is, I think, a bit distracting. And I can't take away any ink, but I can add ink so that the effect of that dark black line is not so obvious. And that, at this point, is what I'm thinking I'm going to do. But for now, I'm still just creating the effect of detail, the overall impression of this tangle of dead flower. I'm not trying to draw the detail. I have a playlist on that if you're interested. And if you're finding this video helpful, please hit the like button right now for me. That would be great. So I'm trying to capture or emphasize the irregular shape and proportions, the complex molding of the bird through the hatching, so that it ends up feeling like it's a real three-dimensional object and not a two-dimensional outline. So now I decide that I'm going to now add some really quite dark hatching, and that in my head was a very conscious decision to make another probably 10-minute commitment to put the ink on the paper to create that effect. And I was also aware that once I started to make one area darker, I might end up having to adjust the values across the whole drawing, or at least in certain parts. But this is the adventure of drawing. We often finish up with a drawing that we weren't expecting to create. And when I started this version, this rough outline, even though my previous 5 outlines only took me, I don't know, from 30 to 60, 90 seconds each to draw, I had almost given up. I had almost thought, oh look, I'm just clearly not ready to draw this right now. Certainly not for a video. But I decided to give it one more go. And this is the one where all the things I'd learned in that playing around with form and marks suddenly came together and let me do something that I felt was worth progressing. But it's going to be very different to what I thought, because I hadn't been expecting to sort of create this silhouette effect. But can you see now that by adding these dark lines behind the bird's head, I've reduced the visual impact of those heavy lines where I kept changing the profile, the silhouette edge of the bird's head. Now, we can still see it. I haven't got rid of it, but it's not as obvious. And I'm going to make it a little darker yet, I think, just looking at the finished photo in front of me before I finish. But I'm not just doing the background. As I do the background and change the values, I stop and I look at the overall drawing again, and I think, where do I need to change parts of this? And I will say that if I were adding to this drawing some more, I would actually make the tail feathers just a little bit darker again. But at this stage, of course, I wasn't aware of what I was going to do value-wise around the tail on the ground. And now you can see that I've decided to make it a bit darker. Birds, I don't think, are easy subjects, even when you love them and you look at them and you have them all around you all the time, as I do. I feel so blessed that we would have about a dozen parrots, different types of parrots, come into our yard. Australia, surprisingly, has more parrots, more different species of parrots than South America. It really is a wonderful thing to behold when the bright coloured birds come into the yard, large and small. So just again, I'm just now adjusting and thinking, where do I go lighter? Where do I go darker? So notice I've balanced the white head of the bird now. I'm still massaging the profile of the head here slightly, hoping I don't make a real big error because I can't do much about it. But notice I've got a very light neck and head, well, a white neck and head, against very dark backgrounds to stand out. The tail feathers, I've got dark bird with lighter background around it, and down the torso on each side, I've kind of bounced differently. And in doing this, I've almost stopped looking at my reference. I'm now just looking at my drawing, and I'm asking myself, what adjustments in value is going to bring out my bird in, I think, visually the most effective way possible. And that's what now guides my marks. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting. I found it really interesting, especially after all the false starts and the having to work through seeing the form accurately enough and then working out what marks would capture it. And of course, you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page if you want to have a go drawing the female Australian king parrot. So why not have a go? But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next video. Bye.